It started with a sound that didn't belong on that quiet suburban street, the kind that made curtains flutter and hearts race. The deep growl of Harley engines thundered down the road, rolling like a storm through sunlight and silence. Four bikers in black leather jackets, their vests branded with the fierce emblem of the Hells Angels, rode side by side. Their shadows stretched long on the hot pavement, and for a moment, it felt like the air itself held its breath. Children froze mid-play. Mothers rushed to their porches, pulling their little ones close. The neighbors whispered from behind blinds, curious, cautious, judgmental, and then a small, trembling voice rose through the hum of engines. "Sir, will you buy my bike?" The words didn't make sense at first. Too soft to belong in such a scene, too innocent to live among rumbling machines and hardened men. When the bikers slowed to a stop, they saw her, a tiny girl, barely 6, standing barefoot on the edge of the sidewalk. Her dress was clean but faded, her hair tangled by the wind. Beside her stood a little pink bicycle with a white basket and fading stickers. In her small hands, she held a piece of cardboard that said ***, for sale. And that's how it began. A story not about power or pride, but about kindness, the kind that comes from the most unexpected souls, the kind that can turn even thunder into hope. The smallest of the 4 bikers, a man they called Ryder, cut his engine first. His brothers followed. The world fell quiet except for the faint ticking of cooling metal. Ryder swung a leg over his bike and knelt before the girl. Her name was Mira. Her eyes, though bright, carried something a child's eyes shouldn't: exhaustion, the kind born from nights of hunger and worry. Behind her, under the shade of a dying oak tree, sat her mother, Clara, thin, pale, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer heat. Ryder's throat tightened. He was used to trouble, bar fights, long roads, loneliness, but not this. Not a child with shaking hands and a voice too brave for her size. "Why re you selling your bike, kid?" he asked gently. Mira looked up, clutching her sign tighter. "Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days, she whispered. "She says it's okay. But I know it's not." The words hit him like a hammer. Ryder, or Wolf as his brothers called him, wasn't born a monster, though life had done its best to make him one. Once he had a son of his own, a boy who loved drawing stars on cardboard boxes. A drunk driver took that from him. After that, Ryder stopped believing in the world. He traded grief for gasoline, pain for tattoos, and silence for the endless roar of his Harley. But that day, looking at Mira's face, something inside him cracked. He asked her what happened, and between sobs and small words, Mira told him about her mother. How Clara had worked at Hensley Catering, the biggest company in town, run by a man named Richard Hensley. He was the kind of man who donated to charities for the cameras, shook hands with politicians, and smiled with his teeth but not his eyes. When the company downsized, Clara was among those let go. She'd begged for her job, explaining she had a child to feed. But Hensley had simply said she was replaceable. Now, the bills stacked higher than the groceries. The power was gone. The fridge was empty, and little Mira, too young to understand pride, had decided to sell the one thing she loved most: her bike. Ryder felt a storm rising inside him. Years of anger he thought he'd buried roaring back to life. He looked at his brothers, Tank, Viper, and Mason, and didn't have to say a word that they'd all been there before. They'd all been broken by life in different ways. Tank lost his wife to sickness because the insurance company called her treatment unnecessary. Viper grew up on the streets, invisible to a system that didn't care. Mason spent half his life in foster homes that felt more like cages, so when they saw Mira, they saw themselves. Small, helpless, forgotten. Ryder reached into his vest, pulled out a thick stack of bills, and placed it gently in her hands. "Keep the bike, kiddo," he said softly. "You already paid for it with your heart." Mira's eyes widened, her lip trembling. "But, sir, I can't take this." Ryder smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes softening. "You just did." But when the engines roared back to life, none of them headed home. They had somewhere else to be. They followed the highway into the city, a blur of thunder and chrome, sunlight flashing off metal as if the sky itself was watching. The road led them to a tall glass tower that gleamed like a monument to greed. Hensley and company people scattered as the bikers pulled up. The front doors swung open, and the men walked in, boots echoing against the polished marble. The receptionist froze. "Can I help you?" she stammered. Ryder didn't answer. He just nodded toward the office at the end of the hall, where Richard Hensley sat behind a mahogany desk, sipping espresso from a gold-rimmed cup. When Hensley looked up, confusion flickered in his eyes. "What is this? Who are you people?" Ryder walked forward and placed something on the desk. It was Mira's for sale sign. Bent, wrinkled, and marked by tiny fingerprints. "That," Ryder said quietly, "is what your greed costs." Hensley frowned. "Excuse me?" Ryder leaned in, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the air. "You took a mother's job, left her to starve, and a 6-year-old had to sell her bike to feed her. You think your title makes that okay? It doesn't." Hensley opened his mouth to argue, but the words never came. For pairs of eyes glared at him, not with hate, but with something worse. Truth. Ryder didn't threaten him. He didn't shout. He simply told him the story, Mira's story, every word like a weight pressing on the man's conscience. "You can buy cars, houses, power," Ryder said, "but you can't buy back your humanity once you lose it." For the first time in years, Hensley said nothing. He looked down at the little cardboard sign, and for a moment, the glass tower didn't feel so shiny anymore. By sunset, something remarkable happened. Word spread that the CEO, Richard Hensley, had anonymously paid off hospital bills for struggling parents, donated food to shelters, and rehired every worker he'd fired, and no one knew why. The media called it a change of heart. But only a few rough men, and a little girl with a pink bike, knew the truth. That evening, Ryder and his brothers rode back to that quiet street. The sun had turned gold, the sky painted with soft oranges and violets. When they arrived, Mira ran to them, laughing for the first time since they'd met her. Her mother, Clara, stood beneath the tree, still weak but smiling, truly smiling. Ryder handed her a small brown bag filled with groceries. "This should last a while," he said. Tears glimmered in Clara's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." Ryder shook his head. "You already did. You raised a little girl brave enough to sell her joy to save her mother. That's worth more than any thanks." They shared bread that night. Bikers, a mother, and a child. The engines cooled in the background as laughter replaced silence. The pink bicycle rested beside the firelight, and in its reflection, Ryder saw something he hadn't felt in years. Peace for a moment. The world didn't seem so broken anymore. Weeks later, a local paper ran a story titled ****, the girl who sold her bike and changed a man's heart. The world called it a miracle. Ryder just called it Monday because sometimes the roughest souls carry the gentlest hearts, and sometimes all it takes to remind the world that kindness still exists is a little girl, a pink bicycle, and a few men who refuse to ride past injustice. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion can bloom in the most unexpected places, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Every share helps real stories of hope reach those who've forgotten what kindness feels like. And tell us below, what would you have done if you were in Ryder's place? Because sometimes one act of courage is all it takes to make the world believe in kindness again.